And welcome to Lift FM 98.5, 103.3 FM, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial. And of course, we are worldwide at liftfm.com. This is Second Chances, a program that really is all about people that are just like you and I, where they've been in different things and the Lord has taken their life and given them a second chance because they took that first step by saying, Jesus, come into my heart. And that's the great thing about knowing Jesus as your Lord and Savior, because He is the God of second chances. And if you do know Jesus, then you totally understand it. If you don't know Jesus, that is actually why we put this program on, so our guest can share their stories and can be a blessing and an encouragement to you so that you would like to ask Jesus into your heart. And that's really why we put this program on the air each and every Tuesday evening. Now, we have a wonderful guest with us tonight. His name is Stephen Post, and among other things, I'm sure he is the author of the book, Hidden Gifts of Helping. And Stephen, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's a delight. Thanks for having me, Greg.
And we want to thank you. Now, I got to tell you, Stephen, as we say this with all of our guests, I don't know many things about our guest prior to the interview, and that's done on purpose because I really want to learn about you as our listeners do. So we just want to kind of establish that for all of our listeners. Now, as I mentioned to you, Stephen, off air, that we love to hear people give their testimonies. That's what it's all about. Obviously, the Lord has done things for each and every one of us. Now, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and different things so we can kind of get a feel of who you are.
Well, I'm Stephen Post. I'm just 60 years old on May 6th. Me, Willie Mays, and Humphrey Bogart. Thanks. I am a committed Christian. I live on the North Shore of Long Island in Stony Brook, where I am a professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine and run a center that does research on compassionate care. But I also, with the help of Sir John Templeton, founded an institute to study agape love, and we call that the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, because when you think about it, the cross is the great symbol of God's love, as Jesus revealed it, but it's unlimited. Even in the most shadowy time, His love was perfectly resilient, and perfectly wise, and perfectly universal for all of us. So I've been running an institute that studies Christian love. I am a graduate, believe it or not, in addition to the sciences, of the University of Chicago Divinity School in Christian theology, and wrote a dissertation on Jonathan Edwards. And I go back a ways. When I was a kid, 16, I hitchhiked across the U.S. to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and I was pretty secular, and I was kind of looking at all these different religious movements on the West Coast. But when I was 23, I had this really profound spiritual experience with the Lord, with Jesus. And I was in Philadelphia at the time. I was working at the University of Pennsylvania. It was about 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was praying. I was praying for guidance, and I was about to nod off, and suddenly I felt overwhelmed by this sensation over my whole body. I felt a warmth. I had this sense of leaving time and space behind, and I sensed a light and a warmth of love that I'd never known or felt that I deserved. And this went on for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I just heard this voice that said, I am Jesus, your Lord. And that's it. So ever since that moment, I've just felt my calling in life was to work as a Christian in the academic world, in medical schools, and in some to try to allow people to more fully understand and discover the power of God's love and of Christ in their lives.
Now, at that point when we were spoken to prior to that, what type of relationship would you consider that you had with Jesus? Had you asked Him into your heart prior to that?
Well, I'd been going to a church, an Episcopal church, and I grew up Episcopalian, but I'd kind of strayed away from the Christian message in my late adolescence, and just kind of got caught up in everything you could imagine, because the West Coast is sort of a grab bag shopping center for any kind of spirituality you can imagine. But I just didn't feel full. I still felt very incomplete. And so when I came back to New York, I was about 21 years old at the time, or 20 years old. I started playing classical guitar, and especially sacred music, in churches around Manhattan and Brooklyn Heights, and I just gradually started coming to more theology lectures at seminaries around the city. Worked at Cornell Medical College for a couple of years. Then I went down to Philadelphia, and again I was just praying real hard for truth, because I felt that somehow I'd gotten off track, and there was an incompleteness in my heart that I just felt. It wasn't that I was radically depressed, but it was just this sense that my life wasn't whole and that I was really missing something, and I just wanted to understand at a deeper heart level the reality of the Lord, because I just never really had that. And so on this morning, and it's the only time it ever happened to me in my life, don't let me give you the impression, Greg, that I'm having such experiences left and right. I mean, this was a really powerful experience, and it's all I ever kind of needed in my life. And afterwards, I actually moved away from the sciences. I was working at the University of Pennsylvania in immunology at that time, and I went off to divinity school and studied theology and pastoral care. And most of my life since then has been writing and thinking and developing programs on God's love, on agape love, on the ways in which Christ's love exemplifies absolute perfection.
Mm. Now, as you mentioned, and we'll bring this up again because I want to learn a little bit more about this. It says that you are the president of the Institute for Research of Unlimited Love. Tell us about that. That to me sounds very, very interesting.
Well, it's an interesting story. It really is. So, sometimes surprises or miracles come into your life, and so I wanted my daughter Emma. We're talking 1998, to go to the same Christian school I had gone to in New Hampshire as a boy. It's called St. Paul's School. And we took a trip to Boston, and then we flew into Boston. We drove up to New Hampshire, and she decided she didn't want to go, so I could understand that, and she wanted to be back home in Ohio. We lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio at the time, and she had a lot of good friends, and we had a good church, so it was okay. And we spent the day we now had extra in Cambridge, Mass, and I went to the Harvard Memorial Chapel, and I prayed, dear Lord, it would be wonderful if we could create a lot of excitement about the power of your love by engaging even the scientific community in all the self-reported experiences that people give about how their experience of your love quickened their compassion, gave them a purpose in life, gave them a calling, a vocation, changed their lives, like my life had once been changed. So I kind of let that go. But in 2001, in June, I was at that time I was a professor at the medical school of Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, and I was sitting at my office desk. It was in the morning, and I received the fax of a lifetime. I received a fax from Sir John Templeton, and it said, "Dear Stephen, we need to start an institute that really studies people's experiences of agape love." And Sir John was a devout Presbyterian, and he'd been on the board of Princeton Theological Seminary for many years. And so I said in a fax back, "Sir John, that's a great idea. Everybody's studying human deficits and human diseases and all the problems in the world, but why don't we just really focus in on on people's experiences of the Lord's love, and that's something that you can study endlessly. In fact, we just finished a big national survey. Believe it or not, 80% of Americans claim that they have experienced God's love in their lives. So I faxed back to Sir John, what shall we call it? And his response was, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And so I had a moment of trepidation because I was in a big academic medical center, and I wondered kind of how people would respond. So I sent back a fax. I said, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism, because altruism is a little more sciencey, but it doesn't have any of the specificity of love and agape. So Sir John said, nope, it's agape love, but not too many people speak Greek, so we'll call it unlimited. And then he said in that fax that, the greatest symbol of agape love is the cross. So I have an Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. He also, by the way, in that fax said $8.9 million. And I faxed back, Sir John, I just love that language. It jumps right off the page. And we were able to, study so many things. We just finished a national survey done scientifically with John Green, who's a Pew Fellow. It's a national study of people's experiences of God's love across America, and it's amazing. 80% of Americans, despite all you hear about God is dead and secularism, they report that they have occasionally, especially in the darker times of life, experienced God's love. Half of people, 50% of people, say that they have experienced it frequently, and then it just gets higher and higher. So it's just incredible. The Spirit is alive, and anybody who says anything to the contrary is just not speaking the truth, because God does not abandon us.
And there's probably one of the most powerful and most important words in the Bible is love. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, all thy soul. And love thy neighbor as thyself, a very important word, and Jesus even said that that's one of the most important commandments.
It is. And the hidden gifts of helping is all about that. It's about the commandment. It's also about how we are blessed when we live by the commandment. If you take Matthew 25, take care for the needy, if you think about the love commandment, it's a commandment that's there so that we can contribute and help the people around us, but it's also there for our own well-being. In other words, it's a commandment that allows us to flourish, and that's what people don't realize. But that's why in 2 Corinthians 9:7, St. Paul says God loves a cheerful giver. That's why in the book of Acts, you have that passage from Jesus, 'tis better to give than to receive. This notion that when we get in touch with the Spirit of God, and through that we give deeply to the people around us in God's love, then we come into our own. We discover our strengths. We discover our higher purposes in life. We discover more meaningful relationships as we get involved with like-minded believers. Everything in our lives changes for the better. And then we have over 15 new scientific studies that just look at this. So, for example, in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this made the New York Times, if you look at people who go dry and where are they a year later, if they fulfilled the 12th step of serving others, and we have all kinds of measures for that, visited fellow alcoholics in prisons or detox units, or just been greeters at the door of AA meetings or been sponsors, they have a 40% recovery rate. They have a 40% recovery rate 1 year after going dry. If they've done everything else, but they haven't served their fellow alcoholic, they only have a 22% recovery rate. So New York Times reported it. You double the likelihood of recovering from alcoholism if you help other alcoholics. And in study after study, whether it's bereaved widows, whether it's people with MS, I could go on and on. When we tap into this kind of capacity, it's good for us. But human love is limited. I mean, it's you can't trust it. It's fickle. It's changing, and that's why no matter what we want to say about being in the image of God and about the better part of our natures, We need that experience of the Spirit, and we need the teaching of and the modeling of Jesus, because Jesus' love was perfectly unchanging, perfectly wise. We do a lot of unwise things with our love. It was perfectly universal, perfectly intense, perfectly pure, perfectly dependable. And so it's when that love of the Lord is in our hearts that we really come into our own.
Final thing before we get to the book, you mentioned about the cheerful giver. And matter of fact, you even write a blog entitled "The Joy of Giving." Tell us about that.
Yeah, I write a blog for Psychology Today, which is a national psychology magazine, called "The Joy of Giving," and I just report all these wonderful findings that we have about why it is that people feel flourishing when they get away from the self and the problems of the self and all the hostility and the bitterness and the rumination and all of that, and they just reach out and help other people, what it is that they experience and how their brain is affected and their immune system and their hormones and even their longevity. Believe it or not, people who are givers tend to live longer, healthier, happier lives.
In the book, you the title is entitled "The Hidden Gifts of Healing," and
of helping.
I'm sorry. The Hidden Gifts of Helping. I'm sorry, Hidden Gifts of Helping. How did you come up with the name of your book for that, Stephen?
Well, I have to be honest. The editors at Joszy Bass came up with that, and I liked it. I thought it made a good point, because we want to give to others. We want to love God and love our neighbor, because that's what we're commanded to do, and we want to help other people because it's good for them, and we're committed to their well-being and to their security and to their happiness at least as much, and in some cases even more so than our own, and that's really what love is all about. However, it's also the case that as a kind of a byproduct or a side effect, something that's not even intended, we ourselves have these kinds of benefits. And so the hidden gifts of helping is about that kind of unsought delight that we ourselves experience when we help others.
Now, of course, it talks a lot about that in the Bible, but what first got you drawn toward that topic?
Well, when I was, this goes back a long ways. When I was 15, I had a really interesting experience. I was up in Boston because I'd gone to school up in New Hampshire, and we'd all actually gone into Boston for the weekend, and like some teenagers do, I just got wildly drunk on a couple of six-packs of beer, which was not a good thing. And I woke up, it's actually in the book, I woke up in a bathtub and was a little bit covered with pizza. And I just had this powerful sense that I would get myself up, take a shower, go to church, which I did, and never drink again. Happened that my favorite uncles on both my mother's side and my father's side of the family were in the process of dying of alcoholism at the time. In fact, my name is Stephen Garrard Post. My uncle Gary died of alcoholism. It's a long history. So I just decided that I was going to stop that entirely. And at the time, I had an African American theology teacher at St. Paul's named the Reverend John Walker. We called him Johnny Walker. And he was teaching a course about agape love and the thought of all the people from Atlanta like Howard Thurman and Benjamin Elijah Mays and Daddy King and Martin Luther King. He was an African-American reverend in the Episcopal tradition who then, a few years later, went down and became the dean of the National Cathedral. And there's now a Reverend John Walker Park in Washington near Howard University Divinity School. So I took this course with him, and it was just really powerful, and I determined that I was going to study, the one thing here on earth that means the most in heaven, and that's God's love. And I even though I, in my late teens, I got caught up a little bit in the world of kind of religious craziness. I slowly came to realize the completeness and the fullness of the expression of love in Jesus' life, and I started reading the Bible a lot more. And so then when I was 23, I had that experience, but I stuck with it all my life. So, whether it's in divinity school or whether it's, teaching about spirituality and health and compassion in medical schools, whether it's working with the Alzheimer's community. There's a chapter on my work with the demented. I've written a lot of best-selling books about the care of the deeply forgetful, and that chapter begins with this story about Jim, who was an older guy. He was in severe Alzheimer's. He was in a special care unit in a nursing home in Chardon, Ohio, called Heather Hill. And I read the little biographical sketch on the wall about him, and I went out into the unit, and I took Jim over to a chair, and I asked him how his two sons were, and he couldn't answer at all. But he had a twig in his hand, and he put the twig in my hand, and when he did, he beamed this huge smile, and he was glowing, and he said, this is a guy who was totally in the advanced stage of dementia. He said, God is love. Slowly, but he said it. And it turns out, I asked the nurse, what's the story with Jim? Well, he grew up on a farm in northeastern Ohio, the Western Reserve area, and his father was a very deeply committed Christian, and he loved his father very much. And his father gave him a chore every morning, which was to bring kindling in for the fireplace. And so, like quite a few people with dementia, he still had this symbolic memory, and he'd gone back in time to the point that he most associated with tender, loving care. And so that twig he gave me was a symbol of the kindling that he had been bringing into the house as a child because he was under the care and tenderness of his father's love. And so that's really powerful, and it just shows you that there's no place God can't go. I mean, we can have dementia, we can have all kinds of problems. We can have autism, we can have depression. There's no mental cognitive condition that rules us out. In other words, God can always reach in to those kinds of shadowy spaces and work miracles and bring hope. And I think with Jim there was a kind of resurrection of a sort, because I'm telling you, if love was electric, when he gave me that twig, the place would have been on fire.
Wow, what a story. Of course, we're visiting with Stephen G. Post. He is the author of The Hidden Gifts of Helping. And Stephen, you write in the book, The Hidden Gifts of Helping, that helping is to be a lifetime activity. Why do you think that as we get older, we kind of think in our minds that we're not required to help others as much as perhaps when we're younger? Why do you think it is that we feel that way?
Well, it's really unfortunate. I know that there are people who grow old and they're rising at noon. I don't want to paint a stereotype, but they're rising at noon for martinis. Okay, don't quote me. and the amazing thing, is that if you look at the studies, we now have 8 or 9 studies from Stanford, from Brown, from the University of Michigan, from a lot of very distinguished universities, showing that older adults, 60 and older, who can report even low thresholds, just a couple of hours of volunteering a week through their churches, through hospitals and the like, that they live on average, if you follow them over a 20-year period, 2 years longer than the ones who are not involved in giving. And so it's actually, if you want to live a little longer life and a little happier life, they also report fewer or lower levels of depression. They get through bereavement more quickly when they lose a spouse. If you want to flourish as an older adult, don't just think, well, now it's my time to sit down and enjoy the sun and have martinis. No, on the contrary, this is the time when you can really flourish by helping others. And the data on that are absolutely compelling and not controversial, and they're taught in health psychology 101 classes all over the country.
Mm. Can you be a little more specific and give us some examples of, of course, the giver and the receiver both getting blessed? Can you give us some other examples of that?
Oh yeah, so it's really important. I've been around the country a lot, doing workshops with volunteer programs in hospitals. Nowadays, a lot of hospitals depend more and more and more on volunteers, and they even have volunteer offices and staff and managers. So this is becoming a major field, and so the key thing is that when people do volunteer as older adults, they need to volunteer in an area where they feel a calling. And that's where really God comes in. In our national survey, we discovered that most people experience God's love as a sense of calling. God just calls them to do something. They feel this spiritual urge to be in a certain place at a certain time, doing a certain thing to help others. So work with a group that you feel called to work with. Most of my life, it's been people with dementia, and there's a long story there, but also people with autism. And I have a way of connecting with them, and people kind of remark about it, and I just think it's a little bit of a gift in my life. So that's how I work, and so work with a group that you feel called by God to work with, number one. Number two, work from strength. So it's important for older adults to do things that they feel are making a difference, so they can be effective, so that they can use their gifts, their God-given gifts. They want to be doing something that allows them to feel that they're making a difference, and not just gives them a sense of frustration and inadequacy. The other thing is, it really helps to have a community that you're a part of, and especially a church. So right now, there's a best-selling book by Robert Putnam of Harvard, and it's called American Grace. And it says that 60% of the social giving in our society, of the generosity, the financial giving, the face-on-face helping, comes right out of the Christian communities. So it's really important to be connected with the church and to have people that you can share your experiences with, and so you can form a real community around your giving.
Stephen, I kind of hate to do this, but we're going to have to kind of end our discussion there. But of course, if you would like to obtain a copy of The Hidden Gifts of Helping, Stephen, how can one do that?
Well, like every book today, the best and easiest way is Amazon, and but the website is www.Stephen with the PH, STEPHENG, like Gary. That's my uncle, So Stephen G. Post, POST. So www.StephenGPost.com, and then / hidden gifts. But if just go to my website, StephenGPost.com. You can order it from Barnes & Noble through the website or from Amazon, and it's in most bookstores. It actually, shockingly, I was surprised by this, it made the Wall Street Journal nonfiction bestsellers list last weekend, number 10.
Wow, how about that? Any plans to write any other books, or have you written any other books?
Well, I've written other books. One was called "Why Good Things Happen to Good People" a couple of years ago, which was quite successful. And but I'm actually starting a new book on Thursday, and this is so amazing. It came to me over the weekend. I was praying, and it came to me, and it's going to be called. You get ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, God's Love on Route 80.
Hey, God's Love on Route 80. We knew where you were when you came up with that.
Well, because I've been writing this theology of God's love as revealed through Jesus, and when you write a theological piece, there's probably going to be 500 people who read it, But I want something that it really gets the message of Jesus' love out to the culture. So I'm going to interview 100 people along Route 80, from the George Washington Bridge all the way to the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, and I'm going to ask them. I'm going to have I'm going to video this. I'm going to audio this. I'm going to ask them about their experiences of God's love, of Jesus, of what God's love means in their life, of how it's helped their life, and I'm going to base the book on this kind of grassroots experience, because otherwise, a lot of people in the culture will kind of blow a book like this off. Oh, another book on God's love on agape level. We have dozens, hundreds, thousands of those. But to do something that really is grounded, social scientifically in people's experiences, and really just shows so deeply what this experience means to so many people. That's what I mean. I'm going to do it on Route 80, so it's going to be called God's Love on Route 80.
Wonderful. Stephen, we'd like to thank you for being a guest. Can we have you back again in the coming weeks to maybe talk more about other things you do?
Oh, anytime. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Our guest tonight on Second Chances has been Stephen G. Post, the author of the wonderful book, and boy, we hate to bring this interview to an end, called The Hidden Gifts of Helping, and available at all the major sites, including his own personal site at StephenGPost.com. Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here at Lift FM, 98.5, 103.3 FM, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial.